So I want to talk about stillness today, and use the concept of stillness. Stillness is one of those words that can be used as a stand-in for sort of what we're trying to access in our meditation practice. You have to remember these words are pointers. They're not going to get you all the way there. And that's why there's so many different words we can use: stillness, silence, love, awareness, so on and so on. But stillness points in a nice way to an aspect of what is being practiced when we meditate. We are practicing stillness. And for all the reasons we've talked about in the past few weeks, why we might want to approach something like stillness, they all apply. It's a way to live our lives without suffering. So, but for today, maybe think of stillness as peacefulness as well. And to achieve a kind of peacefulness, there needs to be a kind of stillness. And we can use the metaphor of a surface of a lake. A peaceful lake is a still lake. And so we practice, this is one reason that the formal practice of meditation involves sitting still. One way we can begin to move towards stillness is by directing our attention to everyday examples of stillness, things that we have access to. And so when we sit on the cushion and attempt a kind of physical stillness, that's giving us a doorway. It's giving us a direction to move with our attention toward stillness. We want to use our wisdom here to think about what this means, because we can think of a still body in two different ways, right? Well, a still body could be one that is trapped or constrained or frozen or repressed, or right? There's all sorts of ways that stillness would not be peaceful. And some of us will find ourselves in that circumstance when we first try to meditate in stillness. It's a struggle to keep our body still. And that's really not the stillness we're ultimately aiming for. And you can just tell because it's not peaceful. Doesn't mean it's wrong necessarily. We have to go through those stages, but we're looking towards a stillness that is peaceful. So then there's another way the body could be where it's still, but it's relaxed and peaceful. So what is the difference? What is the ultimate difference between those two things? Well, ultimately, the difference is that the peaceful stillness is the letting go of activity. The non-peaceful stillness is the increasing of activity. Does that make any sense? There's a way of getting still with our body where we drop everything we're doing, aiming for, fighting for. We do this when we fall asleep at night. Do it to some degree. And then there's a stillness where we're enforcing a stillness from outside, where we're struggling to impose it, where we're actually trying to stop movement as opposed to let go of activity. Letting go versus constraining. So as we're sitting here, you can start to feel into the difference between those two types of stillness. It can be useful to realize, oh, I can make my body still just by not moving anymore. It's really useful. It's a simple kind of thing. It's a simple kind of thing that can be useful. For instance, if you're addicted to something, you're addicted to cigarettes or whatever it is. And you go, all I have to do is not move my hand towards the cigarettes. That's all I have to do is not make the muscular movement. Certainly I have control over my hand, don't I? That's not going to solve your problem, but it actually can be a doorway into the solution to that problem. Because if it's obvious that you do have control over your own hands, then that you do have the ability to not move your hands if you want to, or your mouth, or whatever it is you wish you would not do anymore. If it's obvious to you, yeah, I am capable in this second of not moving my hands, then the lack of stillness is coming from somewhere else. And this is why we sit in stillness. We realize, oh, I can make my body still, and yet somehow I am not still. In fact, for most of us, when we make our body still for the first time, or even for many years, there's a lack of stillness increases on the interior. But stillness on the interior can be achieved in two different ways, in exactly the same way as it is with the body. We can try and force stillness, shut our mind down, stop our emotions, and force a kind of stillness. But that's a stillness that's not peaceful. So we look for a stillness that comes from letting go of activity. And the trick there is we have to find out where the activity is coming from. If you want to be still, you have to find yourself. And there is a trail of breadcrumbs back to yourself. It is the lack of stillness. We've talked about this in other ways. It's the suffering. It's a whole bunch of there's other ways of talking about it, but there's a trail of breadcrumbs wherever your attention is that you can follow back to the source of the activity. As you get closer to the source, the energy of the activity can make it hard to focus on the source. I hope this isn't abstract. There is a you that's doing things, right? You know that. This is one of the basic things. Here I am doing stuff. Where is that happening? At first, you see your hand move to pick up the cigarette, and you're like, that's where it's happening. It's happening in my hand to pick up the cigarette. And so you still the hand. And now you still feel activity happening. There's still doing happening. There is not peacefulness yet. So you've stilled the hand. You have to move back further down the breadcrumb to find the breadcrumb trail to find where the stillness is coming from. The lack of stillness is coming from. It sounds philosophical, but I'm actually laying out a very practical almost step-by-step process to finding peacefulness. It requires not enforcing peacefulness, but letting go into peacefulness. And that requires you to find where you are not letting go, to find where the doing and activity is coming from. It's almost like a pebble is being dropped into the pond, and all you have access to are the waves. And you could follow them back to the center where that pebble was dropped in. Just think of yourself as a tiny little insect floating on the surface of the water. And the waves start coming, they give you a direction. They tell you the direction back to the center of the disturbance. So the same here. Where is the center of the disturbance? You don't have to struggle. Just go as close as you can get and then let go from there. More and more stillness. And ultimately, this stillness we see is actually not about movement or lack of movement. You can be perfectly still and be moving the body, interior. Your interior can be perfectly still and you're dancing. Athletes talk, musicians, dancers talk about this all the time, a kind of stillness when they get into the flow. Because why? Because they are no longer, they've let go into the peacefulness. So the stillness ultimately is not actually about physical stillness. It's not even about mental stillness, really. Although often we won't really taste stillness until we get some space from our mentality. So it can be useful to have some mental stillness, just as it can be useful to have some physical stillness. Where is the source of the lack of stillness? The source is what you think you are. So you're really asking the question, where am I? Where am I the doer? Where am I the struggler? Where am I the one that's fighting? And we don't try to shut that doer down. Once we find it, we can just let go, just like we can not lift our hand to pick up the cigarette. We can no longer lift ourselves to act in the world. We can sit in peacefulness. And it's as if the pebble drops into the water and all the waves go out, but you see that at the center where that pebble dropped in, the water stills. In Zen, there is a phrase that's something like, ordinary mind is the way. Ordinary mind is the way. And why do I bring that up? As we're talking about stillness. Because as we sit in meditation, you may think that we are trying to create a different mental state than the one we have. In fact, almost certainly we are doing that. But that's ultimately not the goal. How could ordinary mind be the way? Ordinary experience is the way. Everyday life is the way. Because when you become perfectly still, you are no longer trying to alter anything. Meaning that your ordinary everyday experience, your ordinary mind, your ordinary life is fine as it is. There's no part of you struggling against it. Because you've now put down activity. You've let your hand settle. You found some peace with your experience. Now, again, that's not really a thing to understand intellectually, although, we're talking about it, so it might feel like it. It's a kind of koan. Realize that we sit in meditation to be able to achieve our ordinary mind. What does that mean? Right? And you just sit in silence, sort of contemplating that. But stillness is the way.